Japanese noticed this over 100 years ago and quietly built their entire household finance system around a different starting question. Not what can you cut, but what can you move before you ever feel it? And the answer they came up with is why a country with, on average, lower wages than the United States today ends up with households holding 2, 3, sometimes 5 times the emergency buffer American households do. Not through discipline, through a different order of operations. 3 specific concepts do the heavy lifting. And the mechanism behind the first one is so quietly powerful that the same insight, rediscovered decades later by an American economist, became one of the most influential pieces of behavioral research of the last 30 years. But it started in a Japanese household in 1904, and it started with a single word. Start with the piece of American advice you've probably tried and quietly failed at. Save what's left at the end of the month. Picture 2 versions of you. Version 1 decides to save whatever's left after rent, groceries, gas, everything else. Version 2 never sees the money at all. It leaves the account the same day it arrives before a single bill gets paid. Same income, same goal, only one finishes. And it's not the one with more willpower. It's the one whose money never had a chance to be spent in the first place. Here's why. Spending expands to fill whatever room it's given. If saving goes last, it loses every time. Not because you're weak, because your system never reserved it a seat at the table. And this is where the American 3 to 6 month rule quietly betrays you. That rule was never a law of physics. It was a planning assumption from mid-20th century financial advisors, based on how long it typically takes to recover lost income. It tells you the finish line. It tells you nothing about the mechanism. And that omission is the entire reason 46% of American adults still can't hit even the low end of it. The Japanese don't teach the number first. They teach the mechanism first. And the mechanism starts with the same insight an American researcher would rediscover and get famous for almost exactly 100 years later. In the early 2000s, behavioral economists Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi ran a program at a mid-sized manufacturing company. Instead of asking employees to save more of today's paycheck, they asked them to commit in advance to saving a slice of tomorrow's raise. Money the employee had never held yet, and so never felt was theirs to lose. They called it Save More Tomorrow. In their published results, participants' saving rate climbed from about 3.5% of income to nearly 14% over roughly 4 years, almost entirely on autopilot. Nobody gritted their teeth. Nobody felt poorer. The money never passed through their hands as spendable cash to begin with. Thaler's research on the psychology of saving eventually earned him the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017. But the principle he named had already been living in Japanese kitchens for a full century before he ran the experiment. It was invented by a woman most Americans have never heard of, and it's the first of the 3 concepts. Her name was Hani Motoko, Japan's first female journalist. In 1904, she published a household ledger for working women based on a simple insight. Money divided before it lands is felt differently than money divided after. She called it kakeibo, roughly household finance book. The kakeibo doesn't track your spending. It divides your income the moment it arrives into categories that never mix: survival, cultural, books, learning, family, optional, savings. Each category lives in its own envelope, its own account, its own mental compartment. The insight the American budget got wrong is right there. A traditional American budget shows you where money went. Kakeibo decides where money goes before it feels spendable at all. Same paycheck. Completely different psychology. The saving envelope is filled at 8 a.m. on payday, not at 11 p.m. on the 30th from whatever's left. That's tool 1 of 3. And on its own, it explains the timing. But it doesn't yet explain why cutting your morning coffee has never worked. A Japanese household using kakeibo alone would still fail every time willpower did. Something else is doing the heavy lifting, and that something is why the entire American approach, the one built on cutting things out, has been quietly setting you up to fail. Consider the myth of the latte. The math on coffee was never the actual problem. The problem is what happens when your whole plan runs on restriction. Willpower behaves less like an unlimited resource and more like a muscle that tires. Cut out everything you enjoy for a savings goal, and around week 3, one bad day collapses the whole thing into a single purchase meant to feel like relief. Then comes the guilt, and the guilt usually kills the next attempt before it starts. That's why every cut your coffee plan fails on a long enough timeline. It doesn't fail because the arithmetic is wrong. It fails because the arithmetic runs on a battery that drains. The Japanese approach doesn't run on that battery at all. It runs on the opposite instinct, one so specific to the culture that there's a word for it. And there's one particular application of that word that, done once, will outpace weeks of careful budgeting. It has to do with money you didn't plan for, a tax refund, a small bonus, a surprise reimbursement. Money the American budget quietly loses every year without noticing. The word is mottainai. It translates loosely as what a waste, but not in the American scolding sense. It's a specific feeling, closer to grief, for the potential of something being thrown away. A leftover meal, a subscription forgotten, a tax refund that quietly disappeared into small, forgettable purchases. That last one is where Motanai does what American budgeting can't. When a bonus, refund, or surprise reimbursement lands, the American brain files it as extra, not real, which is exactly what makes it disposable. Studies of lottery winners and windfall recipients show the same pattern. Money that doesn't feel earned gets spent faster than money that does. The Motanai response is to route that windfall to the fund the day it hits, before it feels like yours to spend on anything else, not out of guilt, out of respect for what it could become. A single automated rule. Any deposit above a set amount routes to the fund by default, often outpaces weeks of careful budgeting, because the entire American approach was fighting the wrong month. The big saving months are the ones with the surprises. That's tool 2 of 3, but even a household using Kakebo and Motainai together would still stare at the 6-month number and feel it was impossible. Kakebo fixes the timing. Motainai fixes the windfall leak. Neither fixes the number itself, because the number most Americans calculate is the wrong number, and the third concept is the one that quietly cuts it by roughly a third. The word is seikatsu-hi, literal translation, living cost. Not lifestyle cost, living cost. When most Americans calculate 6 months of expenses, they add up everything they currently spend. Streaming, takeout, vacation fund, gym membership. That number is real, but it's the wrong number to build an emergency fund around. And it's the single biggest reason the goal feels unreachable. An emergency fund isn't meant to preserve your current lifestyle. It's meant to keep you housed, fed, insured, and functional if income stops. Rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, minimum debt payments, transportation to work, that's seikatsu-hi. Nothing else qualifies. For most American households, seikatsu-hi is 25 to 35% smaller than their full monthly spending, which means 6 months of survival expenses is often closer to 4 months of your current lifestyle. Same 6-month goal, cut by a third. And the number of people who quit before starting because they confuse the two is genuinely large. The final piece is architectural. A Japanese household doesn't keep savings and spending money in the same bank. Different accounts, different institutions, different purpose. Kakebo formalizes it on paper. The financial system reinforces it. Do the same. Move your emergency fund to a separate bank, not just a separate account. No debit card attached. No one-tap transfer sitting next to your spending money. That friction is deliberate. Thaler and his frequent collaborator Cass Sunstein call it a nudge. Small friction changes behavior more reliably than willpower does. Think of it like a kitchen cabinet with a child lock. Nobody's willpower is tested every time they walk past. The obstacle does the work willpower used to have to do. Don't trust the version of yourself at 10 p.m. after a hard day to leave that money alone if it sits one click away. Here's what changes once the system is running. The next time something breaks without warning, and at some point it does for all of us, you won't feel the spike of dread. You'll transfer the money, make the appointment, go on with your day. That flatness, that non-event is one of the best financial feelings there is. And nobody talks about it because nothing happened doesn't make a very good story. But it's the entire point. The goal of an emergency fund was never to make you rich. It was to make ordinary problems stay ordinary. A cracked windshield, a broken furnace, a slow month at work. None of that should be the moment your entire financial life comes apart. Most people don't lose their footing because of one catastrophic mistake. They lose it because an ordinary problem arrived at a moment with no buffer underneath it, and one thing quietly knocked over the next. The Japanese figured this out because they built a system that never asks discipline to do the job structure could do better. Kakebo divides money before it feels spendable. Motainai turns waste into fuel instead of guilt. Sekatsuhi keeps the target honest. Friction and layering keep the fund out of reach of the version of you that would spend it. Percentage-based automation matches the rhythm of a real, imperfect income. Take those 5 ideas, layer them on top of one automated transfer into an account you can't see, and in a year, you won't recognize the version of yourself sitting at a kitchen table, staring at a balance that never seemed to grow. Here's the thing about that flatness. The non-reaction when something breaks. It doesn't just feel like relief. It's actually one of the quiet, unmistakable signs that a person is building real wealth without realizing it. Most people who are secretly getting rich never notice they are. They just notice that certain kinds of moments, surprise bills, unexpected repairs, a slow month at work, stop feeling like emergencies at all. It's one of about 9 of them. The full list is in the next video, and once you see them, you'll spot at least 2 or 3 you're already showing.